If you've ever had a conversation about what happened in Montreal that night in 1997, people have definitely tried to float out that theory. Was it indeed a work? I thought the DVD was fantastic. How did it all come about, and what made you finally execute working on this project?
Steve Carino. I guess Steve and I's careers kind of parallel each other even more than I realized now going back and doing this interview. Steve and I were on a 1PW tour in England, and Bret Hart happened to be a guest of honor that weekend. And Steve, obviously he's not going to be disrespectful to Bret and say anything to Bret about, well, I think you're a liar. But Steve made it a point to bring up in jest to some of us his opinions on Montreal. And that always stuck with me as, I never thought of it that way. At this point that this had happened, it had been 5-6 years since Montreal, and I was still a young kid. I didn't get to the point I am today where I'm such a conspiracy theorist in life, not really specifically in wrestling. And I'll clarify that just to say I'm not the guy with tinfoil on my head hiding in my underground bunker, because I don't feel that way. But I do feel that we as humans have agendas. We as humans, unfortunately, too often can be swayed, whether it be financially or in other favorable means. And as soon as you acknowledge that humans have agendas and humans have the capability of lying, and they have no better or worse chance of being honest, whether they're the guy you see on the street or whether it's the guy in political office or whether it's the guy running that $1 million corporation or the guy on Wall Street or unfortunately even some people in religious sense. There's bad apples to every bunch. And as soon as you acknowledge that that's a fact, that opens up so many scary possibilities that I think people may not want to think about. And, I'll use the classic dated example to not be too controversial or polarizing, but I've always had severe doubts about JFK. Since day one I started looking into it. There are so many circumstantial issues and so many logistical issues that just don't make sense on paper. And I'm not the kind of person that wants to think there was a grand conspiracy. If you can logically answer all the questions that I have or that a cynic would have, good for you. I've seen people say that about the moon landing, and I've seen people debunk the moon landing skeptics, and for the most part, I'm fine with that. I agree with the official story. So I always had that kind of an interest, and it wasn't until I rewatched Wrestling with Shadows about 2009 or 10 that it really got my mind thinking. Because I'm watching Wrestling with Shadows, and it strikes me that this documentary is a blatant assistant for the narrative that they want to project. Vince is portrayed as this evil boss, this tyrannical, do whatever he wants, jerk, screwed over his friend and ruined a friendship. And Bret's the Canadian hero who's sympathetic and did everything right and wound up, throwing out on his butt. And, I don't think either of those sides are 100% true. They the truth is somewhere in the middle. But the fact that it was post-edited to reflect that and broadcast on free television, cable television throughout North America, started to get the wheels turning. And I started to read the Dave Meltzer write-ups, and I started to look up some of the shoot interviews, and more things seemed to be contradictory to one another. More and more people seem to have their theories and their thoughts about why it was not on the level, and Vince and Bret could have been secretly co-conspirators. The fact that Jerry Lawler was at ringside, and he didn't believe it, and he did something very similar with Andy Kaufman 15 years prior. Kevin Nash, say what you want about his in-ring career, say what you want about his personality, whatever. I happen to be a big fan of Kevin, but I don't think you can deny he's one of the smartest men this business has seen. and he doesn't buy it. And look at some of the important people he's close with. You know, to add to the fact that Dave Meltzer has a secret source that he can't reveal until he passes away, the fact that Vince pitched the finish to Bret a week before it happened. The most important thing to me, that nobody got hurt. Everybody got what they wanted. Bret didn't lose. Vince got his belt. Shawn got to be the top guy. And everybody made a boatload of money. Bret had the largest contract in wrestling history at that point, I think. Vince turned himself into a billionaire and created WWF Attitude. It was just too perfect. So what I sought out to do with Montreal Theory is, let's tell this whole story from start to finish. Let's start at WrestleMania 12. Let's start 18 months beforehand. And let's trace everything that happened that led to Bret leaving. The issues with Shawn, the issues with Vince, the issues with content, the Turner offers, everything. And once you have that story, now you can watch Disc 2, and we can flip that upside down and see if there may have been a story behind the story. And whether Vince and Bret were in on it for 12 months beforehand or 12 hours beforehand. Two completely different scenarios, but you can concoct a very, very compelling argument for both of those scenarios. And I think whether you believe it or not, if you watch it with an open mind, there'll be at least one point you have to pause your DVD player and just go, I never thought of it like that. And that's the thing, too, is we leave it open-ended. We don't tell you what to think. We just give you the debate, because we have Steve Carino, Tony Mamaluke, a local writer and media personality named Brian Krasman are the chief skeptics. We have Raven, and we have Kevin Kelly as the chief, I guess, official story defenders, for lack of a better term. And, it's really a thorough panel of every different job title, every different era. Some people say, well, why didn't you get any guys that were there? Well, everybody was in the dark, so it wouldn't matter if they were there or not, although a couple of people were. You don't have to be in the grassy knoll to believe what you believe about JFK. You just have to have an educated opinion. And I have some very educated opinions on this DVD set. And, it was a little raw and it was a little lengthy because of the sheer amount of content we had to get out there. But I'm very proud of the fact that it's made a lot of people think and maybe made people more vigilant, not necessarily toward wrestling, but in life, and shows them, what things aren't always as they seem. So don't accept what you're spoon-fed without doing a little research yourself.
Yeah, there's so many things that leading up to Montreal you can just kind of pinpoint and say, well, that's kind of weird. There was 2 or 3 failed rematches that never took place after WrestleMania 12, whether it was losing smiles, knee injuries, or just time not working itself out. There's definitely, I know Bret definitely had 9 million reasons why, it could have worked in his favor. And so to say that in 2005, when Bret came back and the DVD set was put out by the WWE, and then 5 years later, Bret's at WrestleMania, and there's another DVD set, and then there's Shawn's view, and there's this and there's that. There's so many things to leave it open-ended in terms of, is it a work? Is it a shoot? What's the deal? I think
if you look at the story, if you look at the way it was presented, even back in 1997. Even if you don't understand any of the internal things about it, it makes perfect sense as a story, as an ending. You have Bret coming out on television in his character and telling everybody, I'm a Canadian hero, and everybody's screwing me. He got screwed at the 97 Royal Rumble. He got screwed in the Final Four match the next month. All very much a part of the character and a part of the story, but that's the narrative they were presenting. Bret Hart as the misunderstood Canadian hero that takes himself too seriously and ends up with egg on his face in the end. And what a poetic ending that Bret's actual persona, his Bret himself, becomes, I am a Canadian hero, I was misunderstood, they screwed me, and now I have egg on my face. It was the perfect ending to that Bret Hart pro-Canadian nationalist character, whether they intended to or not. And that goes back to why I say just so perfect. If it was an accident, if it was something that had to be done, you'd think it would have been a lot more messy than that.
One thing that it's, great, 18 years or so later, we're still talking about it. And then another thing that always comes to my mind is the one wrestler, in my view anyway, that I never knew if he was hurt, if he was working us, if he's quote unquote playing possum, if he's being giving shoot interviews or shoot promos, is he working us, was Bret Hart. And it's like, if he was limping, I'm like, I think he's really hurt. If he had a match, I'm like, Bastion Booger, that guy's a fake. Bret Hart's a real wrestler. I mean, it's like my whole life as a wrestling fan is always like
Bret's old school, man. He's born and bred in this business from birth. Could he pull it off? Absolutely. Did he? I don't know. It's very possible. And people ask me my opinion, and honestly, my opinion on whether Bret was in on it or not, it swayed back and forth 51 to 49 as I kept making it. Honestly, it was that difficult. But at the end of the day, I want it to be true. I want Bret and Vince to have been in on it together because, boy, what a lesson that would teach other people in the business who try to say, oh, kayfabe's dead and all these fans are too smart. Bull crap. There's no way that's true because fans enjoy being taken for the ride. So if Vince and Bret could have pulled that off at the beginning of the rise of the internet and somehow still be keeping it going today and still making money, by the way, then the two smartest men in wrestling.